Channel. Right, let's move on now to our next story, and this is going to take us to the UK actually, where President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Theresa May a short while ago briefed the media about their talks. For more on that, we're now joined by our correspondent in London, Holly Hudson, who's at Trafalgar Square, and it looks like a horrible, miserable London day, but typical. But didn't put a dampener on the crowds that came to protest.
Well, yes, it's a typical London summer day, shall we say. But yes, earlier there were crowds of protesters here in Trafalgar Square where I'm stood, and they then moved behind me to down Whitehall here to Downing Street, where Donald Trump and Theresa May have been holding talks. Now, we've literally just heard a press conference between the two leaders. It was always going to be extraordinary, as this is Donald Trump, of course, who's known for not necessarily following diplomatic protocol, but he has, as it seems, been on his best behaviour so far. Obviously, we saw him meet the royals yesterday for all the pomp and ceremony. That was yesterday. Today, it's about the politics and the protests. And during this press conference, which at first Donald Trump seemed to be on his best behaviour with Theresa May, talking a lot about the alliance between the two countries, the special relationship. Trump himself described it as the greatest alliance the world has ever known, and they were very keen, both of the leaders, to talk about the things that they share, the partnership itself with jobs, the economies between the two. These are the largest investors in each other, of course, and in terms of security as well, how each other's helped each other's countries on Syria, with Russia. But that wasn't to say that there weren't signs of differences, of course. Now, in terms of the trade deal, which Trump alluded to yesterday, saying talks had already begun, and if the Britain could shake off the shackles of the EU as such, then that could begin. Now, what we heard on that were different opinions, shall we say, by both Trump and Theresa May, with questions about the NHS, which many ministers have come to the fore to say that shouldn't be on the table with a trade deal. Trump himself saying it should be, the Prime Minister saying that negotiations are, of course, that there are talks. Many MPs, though, calling for the NHS to be a red line, and Corbyn and his own government saying that the US corporations would dismantle the NHS one bed at a time. That is not for sale. As well, there were signs of disagreement with regards to NATO. Trump said that the country should increase defence spending on NATO as well. The Prime Minister, however, committed the UK's importance to that organisation. They did touch on other disagreements as well: Iran, climate change, China. However, Trump claimed that was the same purpose with the UK, that there would be no issues on sharing security over, of course, the big Huawei disagreements as well. There were signature signs of Trump too. He described the protests here as fake news, saying all that he's seen in the country so far is a huge amount of love. He gave his thoughts on Brexit as well. A lot of laughter, actually, when the Prime Minister was asked whether she should have followed Trump's advice on Brexit negotiations. She said, well, he did tell me to sue the European Union, which I decided against. And the President saying, well, I would still sue the EU. So that prompted a bit of laughter. He did as well wade in again to the leadership contest, saying that he thought Boris Johnson again would make a good Prime Minister, and the Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, before turning to Theresa May and asking her what she thought of Michael Gove, the Environment Secretary.
All right, so Donald Trump being Donald Trump as usual. Tell us about Theresa May, because I guess this was her last big event before she stops being Prime Minister in the UK. How was this for her, especially given that anything she does or says now perhaps isn't going to help her cause in any way?
Well, during the press conference, Mrs May reiterated the fact that Brexit should still go ahead with a deal, which is, of course, in opposition to the front-runner to replace her, Boris Johnson. He's currently on 2-to-1 odds to replace Mrs May when she steps down in just a few days' time. So in terms of the timing of this state visit, it couldn't have come really at a worse time in that sense. The Prime Minister is essentially a lame duck there in terms of Brexit negotiations. So for Donald Trump as well, he may see that, and there's been a lot of speculation about the fact that he has wanted to come to Britain mainly to meet the royals, to focus on that side of things, the pomp and ceremony, rather than the business side of things.
All right, and then perhaps finally, what about the Brits in general? We know there were protests at Trafalgar Square, but generally, did people care that Donald Trump is in town, or were they so opposed to him being around? What's your take on his reception?
Well, yes, I'm here in Trafalgar Square, and just earlier there were several thousand here crowded into Trafalgar Square before moving down to try and make Trump see them outside Downing Street. And of course that did include as well the infamous Trump baby blimp, the 20-foot high balloon of Donald Trump dressed as an angry orange baby. And there was even a robot of Donald Trump tweeting on the toilet. So a lot of different people here to try and protest against Donald Trump. Their message clear: he is divisive, he is a bully, he shouldn't have been offered the honour of this state visit. And that is a view that a lot of MPs share, including the opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn, who himself will be speaking to protesters, as will a lot of his MPs, Emily Thornberry, describing the president as a bully. But I should say there are supporters of Trump here. I've spoken to the leader of Trump UK, a pro-Trump group. He believes that we shouldn't be cutting off our nose to spite our face, as he puts it. And again, many in Theresa May's government share that view. The Foreign Secretary saying that this isn't about who is in the White House, this is about our relations with the US, and that's something that Theresa May reiterated during the press conference as well. When asked about Jeremy Corbyn, Trump said he didn't know who he was, but that he'd actually turned down a meeting with the opposition leader, and Prime Minister Theresa May saying that, you know, this is an alliance with which we have to compromise. It's too important not to.
Holly Hudson, thanks very much indeed for joining us. That's our UK correspondent in Trafalgar Square. A very wet day there in the middle of summer. That's typical English weather, isn't it? All right, that's where we're going to leave it for the time being. But coming up, the world of business. Colin is standing by.